Jamie Baxter had always taken pride in her home. Nestled at the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood, the house was more than just a structure to her. It was a testament to her hard work, her independence, and her skill as an engineer and designer. Years ago, she had purchased the property as a rundown fixer-upper and turned it into a sanctuary with her own hands. Every detail, from the reinforced wooden deck to the carefully selected landscaping, had been a labor of love. To Jamie, the house wasn't just where she lived, it was who she was. Returning home after a week-long project out of state, Jamie felt a familiar sense of relief as she pulled into her driveway. The sight of her home, bathed in the warm evening glow, always gave her a sense of calm. But as she stepped out of her car and walked toward her front door, something felt off. At first, it was just an odd sound, a faint bubbling noise that didn't belong. Then, as she turned the corner to her backyard, the source of the noise came into view, and Jamie froze in disbelief. There, sitting on her meticulously crafted deck, was a massive hot tub. It gurgled and churned like an unwelcome invader, its jets shooting streams of water into the air. The hot tub was an eyesore, its garish plastic shell clashed with the natural wood of her deck, and its bulk had clearly caused damage to the surrounding area. Several planks were cracked under the weight of the tub, and the elegant railing she had installed was partially torn away to make room for it. Strewn across the deck were muddy footprints, discarded tools, and a crushed flower pot. At the center of this chaos, like the queen of a bizarre kingdom, sat Karen Johnson. Karen, Jamie's overbearing neighbor, was lounging in the hot tub with a glass of wine in one hand and a magazine in the other. She looked up as Jamie approached, her expression a mixture of annoyance and amusement, as though Jamie's arrival was somehow an inconvenience. "Oh, Jamie, you're back," Karen said with a bright smile, as though they were old friends sharing a pleasant moment. "I was wondering when you'd return. Isn't this fabulous?" Jamie's voice caught in her throat as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Karen, what the hell is this? What is this thing doing on my deck?" Karen's smile didn't falter. She waved her wine glass dismissively. "Relax, dear. It's a hot tub. I had it installed while you were away. Your deck looked so barren, you know? I thought it could use a little touch of luxury. You're welcome." "You had it installed?" Jamie's disbelief turned into anger as the words sank in. "On my property? Without asking me?" Karen sighed as though Jamie were being unreasonable. "It's not just for you, you know. It's for the community. We all agreed that it would be a great addition to the neighborhood. I just thought, since you're always so busy with work, I'd save you the trouble of organizing it. And besides, you've got the best deck for it." Jamie could hardly believe her ears. "What community? Who is we? I never agreed to this, Karen. This is my deck, my house. You can't just decide to put something like this here." Karen shrugged, unbothered by Jamie's outrage. "Well, the HOA approved it, so it's not really up to you. And let's be honest, Jamie, your property values just went up thanks to me. You should be thanking me, not yelling at me. But if you're really upset, we can talk about sharing the costs. It's only fair you'll get plenty of use out of it too." Jamie's blood boiled. "Sharing the costs? Are you insane? You think I'm going to pay for something I didn't ask for? Something that's already damaged my deck?" Karen's smile faltered for the first time, and a flicker of irritation crossed her face. "Well, you don't have to be so rude about it. I was trying to do something nice, and this is the thanks I get. Honestly, Jamie, no wonder you don't have many friends around here. Maybe if you were a little more neighborly. Get off my property. Now," Jamie said, her voice low and dangerous. Karen huffed, climbing out of the hot tub with exaggerated indignation. She grabbed her towel and magazine, muttering under her breath as she made her way to the gate. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you realize how much better this could have been for everyone." As Karen disappeared into the night, Jamie stood on her deck, staring at the monstrosity she had left behind. The hot tub gurgled mockingly, the damaged wood beneath it groaning under the strain. Jamie's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a violation of her property, it was a violation of her pride, her hard work, and her autonomy. She spent the next few hours inspecting the damage. The hot tub wasn't just sitting on the deck, it had been crudely connected to her water supply. Pipes snaked through the underside of the deck, and water was already pooling beneath the structure, threatening the foundation. Whoever had done this installation had clearly rushed the job, and the results were catastrophic. As she surveyed the destruction, Jamie's frustration turned into a cold, simmering fury. This wasn't going to end with a conversation. Karen had overstepped in a way that couldn't be ignored. Jamie didn't know what her next step would be, but one thing was certain: Karen wasn't going to get away with this. The next morning, Jamie woke to the sound of a loud banging on her front door. She groggily pulled on a sweatshirt and shuffled to the door, still feeling the exhaustion from the emotional turmoil of the previous night. When she opened it, she found Karen standing on her porch, holding a clipboard and wearing a self-satisfied smile. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she was dressed as if she were heading to an upscale brunch, rather than standing on someone's doorstep at 8 in the morning. "Good morning, Jamie," Karen chirped, as though the events of the previous night had never happened. "I thought I'd drop by and clear the air. I've brought some paperwork for you." Jamie stared at her, incredulous. "Paperwork? What paperwork?" Karen stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, waving the clipboard in the air. "You seemed so upset yesterday, and I realize it's probably because I didn't properly explain things. So, I wanted to make sure we're on the same page. This is all official HOA business." Jamie crossed her arms and blocked Karen's path further into the house. "I don't care what it is. You don't just show up uninvited and barge into my house like you own the place. What are you even talking about?" Karen sighed dramatically and held up the clipboard. "This," she said, tapping the papers with her manicured finger, "is the HOA resolution approving the hot tub installation. It's all perfectly legal. I've highlighted the important parts for you so there's no confusion. You're technically the beneficiary of this project, you see, since it's on your deck. But it's also a shared amenity for the neighborhood, which means you're responsible for the upkeep and the water bill. Now, I've broken down the costs here." Jamie snatched the clipboard out of Karen's hands, her patience finally snapping. She scanned the papers quickly, her eyes narrowing with every line she read. The resolution was dated 2 weeks earlier, while she had been out of town, and it was signed by several HOA members, but not by her. Next to her name was a sloppy scrawl that was supposed to resemble her signature. "You forged my signature," Jamie said, her voice low and steady, though anger simmered beneath the surface. Karen's smile froze, and she waved her hand dismissively. "Forged is such an ugly word. I signed on your behalf as a courtesy, so you wouldn't miss the deadline. It's completely standard procedure. You can thank me later." Jamie dropped the clipboard onto the table and took a step closer to Karen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You forged my signature," she repeated, her voice rising. "You installed a hot tub on my property without my permission. You destroyed my deck, and now you expect me to pay for it. Are you out of your mind?" Karen took a step back, raising her hands as if to calm Jamie down. "Jamie, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not that big of a deal. Everyone in the HOA thought this was a great idea. You're the only one making it into an issue. Frankly, you're being a bit selfish." "Selfish?" Jamie practically shouted. "You trespassed on my property, damaged it, and signed my name on a fake document. That's not selfish, that's illegal. Get out of my house before I call the police." Karen's expression darkened, and for a moment, she dropped the cheerful facade. "You really don't want to go down that road, Jamie," she said, her voice cold. "The HOA has rules, and if you don't comply, there are consequences. I'm trying to help you here. But if you want to play hardball, fine. Just remember you're not exactly the most popular person in the neighborhood. People talk." Jamie opened the door and pointed outside. "Out, now!" Karen gave her a tight smile and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor. "Have it your way," she said over her shoulder. "But don't come crying to me when the HOA starts issuing fines. Oh, and by the way, your water bill should be arriving soon. Enjoy." As soon as Karen was gone, Jamie grabbed her phone and dialed the number for the HOA. She demanded to speak to someone in charge, but after being transferred multiple times, she was told that the board president, a man named Richard Howe, was unavailable. Frustrated, she left a detailed voicemail explaining the situation and asking for an urgent callback. By midday, Jamie's frustration turned to disbelief when a courier arrived with an official-looking envelope. Inside was a bill for nearly $1,200, addressed to her, with a breakdown of charges for water usage, maintenance fees, and shared community improvements. At the bottom of the invoice was a note stating that failure to pay within 30 days would result in additional penalties. Jamie stormed over to Karen's house, but no one answered when she rang the doorbell. She pounded on the door, shouting Karen's name, but the house remained silent. It was only after a few minutes that she noticed Karen peeking out from behind the curtains in her living room, a smug smile on her face. Realizing she wasn't going to get anywhere, Jamie turned and walked away, her mind racing with questions. How had Karen gotten the HOA to approve something so absurd? Who were the people who had signed that resolution, and why hadn't anyone informed her? And most importantly, how could she fight back? Jamie spent the rest of the day poring over the HOA bylaws and local property laws, searching for any loophole or clause that would allow her to challenge Karen's actions. She made calls to her neighbors, trying to gauge whether anyone else had experienced similar issues with Karen or the HOA, but most people were evasive, either unwilling or afraid to get involved. A few expressed sympathy but warned Jamie not to push too hard, saying that Karen had connections and a knack for making people's lives miserable. By the evening, Jamie felt more isolated than ever. She sat on her damaged deck, staring at the monstrosity of a hot tub that had upended her life, and tried to suppress the growing sense of dread in her chest. This wasn't just a petty neighborly dispute, it was a power play, and Karen had every intention of winning. Jamie knew she needed a plan. She wasn't going to let Karen bully her into submission. If the HOA was involved, she would take them on too. She didn't care how long it took or how hard it was, she would fight for her home and her rights. But as the sun set and the shadows deepened, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. The following days were a whirlwind of frustration and escalating conflict for Jamie. Despite leaving multiple messages with the HOA office, she hadn't received a single call back. The water bill, along with the ominous note about penalties, sat on her kitchen table, a constant reminder of the absurd situation she was now trapped in. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen, at least not directly. Jamie caught glimpses of her neighbor peering through curtains or wandering her yard, but Karen always managed to avoid direct confrontation. One morning, as Jamie prepared to leave for work, she found a bright yellow notice taped to her front door. The official HOA letterhead glared at her mockingly, and as she ripped it down and read the contents, her stomach turned. It was a formal notice of non-compliance, accusing Jamie of neglecting her community obligations by failing to maintain the hot tub installed on her deck. The notice claimed that, as a shared neighborhood improvement, the upkeep of the hot tub fell under her responsibility, and her refusal to comply was in direct violation of the HOA's regulations. If she didn't take immediate action, she would face fines, legal fees, and even potential liens against her property. Jamie was livid. She stormed back inside, threw the notice onto the table, and called the HOA again. This time, after being put on hold for nearly an hour, she was connected to someone claiming to be a board representative. His voice was calm but clipped, and the conversation left her feeling even more frustrated. "I'm sorry, Ms. Baxter," the man said in an annoyingly neutral tone. "But the resolution was passed with full HOA approval, and as a member of this community, you're obligated to follow through on the maintenance." "I never approved anything," Jamie shot back. "And that resolution, it's fake. Karen forged my signature, and I have proof." "The resolution is official and binding," he replied, as though she hadn't spoken. "If you believe there was an error, you're welcome to submit a formal complaint. However, until the matter is resolved, you are still responsible for adhering to HOA regulations." Jamie gripped the phone tightly, her frustration boiling over. "You're telling me I have to follow the rules for something I never agreed to? Something I didn't even want in the first place. My property is damaged because of this, and you expect me to just accept it?" "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ms. Baxter," the man replied in a tone that suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "If there's nothing else, I have other matters to attend to." Before Jamie could respond, he hung up. Jamie slammed the phone down onto the counter, her anger giving way to a sinking feeling of helplessness. The Hoa was clearly on Karen's side, or worse, complicit in whatever scheme she was running. And now they were threatening her with legal action. This wasn't just a battle over property anymore. It was a full-blown war. That evening, Jamie decided to take matters into her own hands. She stayed up late researching Hoa laws and property rights, looking for any precedent she could use to fight back. What she found only made her angrier. Haishoes had significant legal power in her state, and while there were regulations meant to protect homeowners, the burden of proof often fell on the individual to prove misconduct. In other words, if she wanted to fight this, she would need more than just her word against Karen's. The next morning, Jamie walked out to her deck to inspect the damage again, hoping to find something she had missed. She crouched down near the hot tub, running her fingers along the cracks in the wood and the hastily patched holes where the water pipes had been installed. As she moved closer to the edge of the deck, she noticed something strange. A faint smell of mildew wafted up from beneath the structure, and when Jamie leaned down to get a better look, she saw that the soil underneath was saturated with water. The haphazard piping from the hot tub was leaking directly into the foundation of her deck, causing the ground to erode and the wood to rot. If she didn't address the issue soon, the entire structure could collapse. Jamie straightened up, her jaw clenched. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Karen's reckless actions weren't just violating her rights, they were actively putting her property at risk. Fueled by anger, Jamie decided to confront Karen directly. She marched over to her neighbor's house and banged on the door. When Karen finally opened it, she was wearing her usual smug expression, as though she had been expecting Jamie all along. "Jamie," Karen said sweetly, leaning against the doorframe. "What a surprise. I was just about to call you. I have some updates about the hot tub." Jamie didn't wait for her to finish. "You need to remove that thing from my property. Now. It's damaging my deck and flooding my yard. I don't care what lies you've told the Hoa or anyone else this stops today." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Jamie, don't be so dramatic. A little water never hurt anyone. And besides, I thought we'd already settled this. The hot tub stays. The Hoa has spoken." Jamie took a step closer, her voice dangerously low. "You forged my signature. You installed that monstrosity without my permission. And now, you're causing thousands of dollars in damage to my property. If you think I'm going to let you get away with this, you're out of your mind." Karen's expression hardened. "You really need to calm down," she said, her voice losing its syrupy tone. "I tried to do something nice for you, for the neighborhood, and this is how you repay me. By acting like a child?" "Remove it," Jamie said through gritted teeth, "or I will." Karen crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "If you touch that hot tub, you'll regret it. I promise you, Jamie. You don't want to make me your enemy." Jamie turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. Karen's words echoed in her mind, but they only strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about a hot tub anymore. This was about standing up for herself, for her home, and for what was right. That night, as Jamie lay awake in bed, she began to formulate a plan. Karen might have the Hoa on her side, but Jamie wasn't going to back down. She didn't know exactly how she was going to fight this yet, but one thing was certain: she was done playing by Karen's rules. Jamie knew she couldn't keep going like this, reacting to every outrageous move Karen made without a proper strategy. For days she had been dealing with mounting threats from the Hoa, water damage threatening to destroy her deck, and Karen's smug confidence that no one could stop her. It was time to turn the tide. Late one night, Jamie sat down at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee, a stack of documents, and a notepad, determined to make sense of the situation and find a way to fight back. She pored over the Hoa bylaws, the forged resolution, and every piece of correspondence she'd received. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp, fueled by sheer determination. The first thing Jamie noticed was that the Hoa resolution Karen had presented seemed suspiciously rushed. While it claimed to have been approved at a meeting, the signatures included names Jamie barely recognized. Most of them weren't even her direct neighbors. These were people who lived on the far edges of the neighborhood, residents who likely had no idea what was going on. Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply off about how quickly Karen had managed to push this through. She wrote down the names on the document and decided to pay them a visit. The next day, Jamie started knocking on doors. It was a nerve-wracking process. She wasn't sure if these neighbors would even talk to her, let alone be honest about their involvement. To her surprise, the first couple she approached, the Thompsons, were more than willing to talk. An older couple in their 70s, they seemed confused when Jamie showed them the resolution with their signatures on it. "That's our signature?" Mr. Thompson said, squinting at the document. "That's not right. We never signed anything like this." Jamie felt a surge of vindication. "Are you sure?" she asked, holding out the clipboard Karen had left her. "Karen claims this was approved at a meeting." Mrs. Thompson shook her head firmly. "We haven't been to an HOA meeting in years," she said. "Karen stopped by last month asking for donations to beautify the neighborhood, but we told her we weren't interested. I don't know where she got this from." By the time Jamie left their house, she had a clearer picture of what had happened. Karen had apparently gone door to door, pushing her fake project under the guise of a neighborhood improvement initiative. Some residents had been too polite to question her, while others, like the Thompsons, had outright refused. It was becoming clear that Karen had manufactured this entire scheme from the ground up, using manipulation, deception, and outright forgery to get her way. Armed with this information, Jamie felt her confidence grow. She knew she needed more evidence to present a strong case against Karen, not just to the HOA but to anyone who would listen. She returned to her house and started digging through her files again, searching for anything she might have missed. That's when she found it, an old email from a year ago, buried in her inbox, about proposed updates to the HOA bylaws. Jamie had skimmed it at the time and dismissed it as unimportant, but now it took on a whole new significance. The email outlined changes to the HOA's jurisdiction over shared improvements. According to the new rules, any shared amenity approved by a majority vote at an HOA meeting would fall under the maintenance responsibility of the property owner where it was installed. Jamie felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about the hot tub. Karen had been planning something like this for months. The timing of the bylaw change, combined with Karen's aggressive push to install the hot tub, was too much to be a coincidence. Jamie printed out the email and started making calls. She needed to find out who had supported these changes and whether there was any connection to Karen. To her surprise, one of the residents, a woman named Lisa Perez, admitted that Karen had been the one to propose the bylaw change in the first place. She framed it as a way to modernize the neighborhood and keep property values high, Lisa explained over the phone. "Honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seems like she had ulterior motives." Ulterior motives, indeed. Jamie's frustration mounted as she pieced everything together. Karen had used her position on the HOA board to quietly push through a rule that would give her the leverage she needed to carry out her scheme. Then, once the bylaws were updated, she wasted no time orchestrating the installation of the hot tub on Jamie's property, fully intending to pass off the costs and responsibility onto her. Feeling like she was finally making progress, Jamie decided to confront Karen again, this time with the evidence she'd gathered. She marched over to Karen's house and rang the doorbell, her heart pounding. Karen opened the door with her usual smug smile, but Jamie didn't give her a chance to speak. "I know what you've been doing," Jamie said, holding up the resolution in the bylaw email. "I've talked to the neighbors. They never signed this. And I know you pushed for the bylaw changes last year. This whole thing was your plan from the beginning." Karen's expression darkened, but she didn't back down. "So what if it was?" she said coolly. "Everything I did was perfectly within the rules. You can whine all you want, Jamie, but the HOA backs me up. You're the one who's out of line." Jamie took a step closer, her voice low and steady. "You forged signatures, Karen. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. And the water damage to my deck. You're responsible for that too. You've crossed the line." Karen smirked. "Prove it." Jamie clenched her fists, resisting the urge to scream. She knew Karen was daring her to escalate things, knowing how difficult it would be to take legal action against an HOA-backed project. But Jamie wasn't going to let Karen intimidate her. She turned and walked away, her mind racing with ideas for her next move. Back at home, Jamie started documenting everything: photos of the damage, copies of the forged resolution, emails from neighbors confirming their refusal to sign, and screenshots of the bylaw changes Karen had pushed through. She even began keeping a journal of every interaction she had with Karen, knowing that a clear record of events would strengthen her case. Then, just when Jamie thought she was making progress, Karen struck again. One afternoon, Jamie returned from work to find a crew of workers on her deck, unloading supplies. Her stomach dropped as she approached them. "What are you doing?" she demanded. One of the workers looked up, startled. "We're here to finish the hot tub installation," he said. "The HOA hired us to make some upgrades." Jamie couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stormed over to the crew leader and demanded they stop immediately. When he hesitated, she pulled out her phone and called the police, explaining that unauthorized work was being done on her property. By the time the police arrived, Karen was already on the scene, feigning innocence. "This is just a misunderstanding," Karen said sweetly. "The HOA approved this project. Jamie must have forgotten." But Jamie wasn't backing down. She showed the police her deed, proving that the property was hers, and demanded that the workers leave. The crew packed up reluctantly, but Karen's smug expression told Jamie this was far from over. That night, as Jamie reviewed her growing pile of evidence, she realized just how far Karen was willing to go. This wasn't just about the hot tub, it was about control. Karen wanted to prove that she could manipulate anyone, bend the rules to her will, and come out on top. But Jamie wasn't going to let her win. With every new piece of evidence, every conversation with her neighbors, Jamie felt her resolve harden. Karen might have the HOA in her pocket, but Jamie had something stronger, the truth, and she was ready to use it. Jamie's confrontation with the workers on her deck marked a turning point in the conflict. Karen's brazenness had reached new heights, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop until she broken Jamie entirely or forced her to accept the hot tub and the financial burdens that came with it. The fight was no longer just about property or water bills, it was about power. Karen wanted control, and she was willing to twist the rules and escalate the situation at every turn to get it. The very next morning, Jamie woke to find another HOA notice taped to her front door. This one accused her of harassment and obstruction of neighborhood improvements, citing her refusal to allow the workers to complete the hot tub project. The letter was dripping with legal jargon, threatening fines and even the possibility of legal action if she continued to interfere with HOA-approved projects. Jamie crumpled the letter in her hands, her frustration boiling over. She had done everything right, followed the law, protected her property, and documented Karen's misdeeds, but it seemed like the entire system was stacked against her. Later that day, Jamie decided to speak directly with Richard Hale, the HOA president. After days of unanswered voicemails and pointless calls to the HOA office, she finally managed to track him down at a local community meeting. Hale was a tall, heavy-set man with a perpetually distracted air about him, as if he were always thinking of something more important than the person in front of him. When Jamie approached him, clipboard in hand, he greeted her with a curt nod, but made no effort to hide his impatience. "Mr. Hale, we need to talk about Karen and this so-called hot tub project," Jamie began, trying to keep her tone calm but firm. "She forged my signature, installed the hot tub without my permission, and is now using the HOA to bully me into accepting it. This is completely illegal." Hale raised a hand to stop her. "Ms. Baxter, I've heard about your situation. Karen has already explained everything. As far as the board is concerned, the project was approved according to HOA guidelines. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to submit it in writing, and we'll review it at the next meeting." "I've already submitted multiple complaints," Jamie said, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "And I've provided evidence, photographs, emails, testimony from neighbors who didn't sign the resolution. What more do you need?" Hale sighed and adjusted his glasses. "Karen is a long-standing member of this community, and she's done a lot of good for the neighborhood. She wouldn't push a project like this without good reason. Frankly, Ms. Baxter, this feels like a personal dispute. I suggest you work it out with her directly." Jamie couldn't believe what she was hearing. "She's lying to you, Mr. Hale. She's manipulating the entire HOA to serve her own interests, and you're just letting her get away with it." Hale frowned, his expression hardening. "Ms. Baxter, I don't appreciate your tone. If you continue to disrupt HOA proceedings, We will have no choice but to take formal action against you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." Jamie watched him walk away, her hands trembling with anger. It was clear that Karen had hail wrapped around her finger, or worse, that he was complicit in her schemes. Either way, Jamie knew she couldn't rely on the Hoa to resolve this. If anything, they were part of the problem. That evening, Jamie returned home to find her property vandalized. Her recycling bins had been overturned, the contents scattered across her driveway, and someone had spray-painted the words, "Selfish Neighbor," in bright red letters on her garage door. Jamie's heart sank as she surveyed the damage. This was no random act of vandalism. It was a targeted attack, meant to intimidate her. And Jamie had no doubt who was behind it. She spent hours cleaning up the mess, her mind racing with questions. How far was Karen willing to go? And how much longer could Jamie endure this harassment before something truly disastrous happened? As she scrubbed the graffiti off her garage door, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Looking up, she saw Karen standing at the edge of her property, watching her with a smug smile. Jamie felt a surge of rage, but forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing her break down. The next day, Jamie installed a security system with motion-activated cameras around her property. She hated feeling like a prisoner in her own home, but she knew she needed to protect herself. If Karen or anyone else tried to pull another stunt, Jamie would have the evidence to fight back. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. Late one night, Jamie was jolted awake by an alert on her phone. She opened the app connected to the cameras and saw a live feed of Karen and a man Jamie didn't recognize sneaking onto her deck. The man was carrying what looked like a toolbox, while Karen gestured toward the hot tub, her voice barely audible over the sound of the bubbling water. Jamie's heart raced as she watched them tamper with the pipes beneath the deck, clearly trying to make additional modifications. Jamie considered calling the police right then and there, but something stopped her. Instead, she recorded the footage and decided to wait. She needed a stronger case, something that would leave no room for Karen to wriggle out of responsibility. Over the next few days, Jamie reviewed the footage carefully, documenting every violation, every trespass, and every act of sabotage. By the end of the week, she had a mountain of evidence that painted a damning picture of Karen's behavior. But Karen wasn't done yet. In a final act of escalation, she began spreading rumors about Jamie throughout the neighborhood. Jamie overheard snippets of conversations at the grocery store and the local park neighbors whispering about how she was unstable, antisocial, and ruining the community. It was infuriating, but Jamie refused to let it shake her. She had the truth on her side, and she was determined to see this fight through to the end. Then, one morning, Jamie received a letter from the Hoa informing her that they would be holding a special meeting to address the ongoing conflict between her and Karen. The letter made it clear that Jamie's actions would be under scrutiny, and she suspected that Karen had orchestrated the whole thing to paint her as the villain. But instead of feeling nervous, Jamie felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to expose Karen for who she really was. Jamie spent the next few days preparing for the meeting, organizing her evidence, and rehearsing her arguments. She knew the odds were against her. Karen had the Hoa on her side, and many of the neighbors had already been swayed by her lies. But Jamie wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about the hot tub anymore. It was about standing up to a bully who had gone unchecked for far too long. And no matter what it took, Jamie was going to make sure Karen finally faced the consequences of her actions. The whole meeting was held in the neighborhood's community center, a modest building with bland beige walls and rows of folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Jamie arrived early, armed with her meticulously compiled evidence, photographs of the damage to her deck, copies of the fake resolution with forged signatures, emails from neighbors denying they had signed anything, and most damning of all, the security footage showing Karen trespassing on her property with a contractor in tow. She had spent days organizing every detail, determined to expose Karen once and for all. As the room filled with residents, Jamie felt the weight of their stares. Karen had done her work well. Her smear campaign had painted Jamie as the uncooperative neighbor, the woman standing in the way of community progress. Whispers filled the air, and Jamie caught fragments of conversations. "She's making such a fuss over nothing," one man said. Karen's just trying to help the neighborhood, another woman murmured. Jamie clenched her fists, ignoring the murmurs, and focused on the task ahead. Karen arrived with her usual flair, wearing a bright floral dress and a smile that oozed false confidence. She strutted to the front of the room and took a seat beside Richard Hale, the Hoa president, who nodded at her like they were old friends. Karen greeted the crowd warmly, as though this meeting were a celebration in her honor. Jamie's stomach churned, but she kept her composure. This time, Karen wouldn't be able to charm her way out of accountability. When the meeting began, Hale stood and called for order, his voice measured but authoritative. We're here today to address the ongoing dispute between M's Jamie Baxter and Mev's Karen Johnson regarding the installation of the hot tub. Both parties will have an opportunity to speak. Let's keep things civil and respectful. He glanced at Jamie briefly before turning to Karen. Ms. Johnson, since you initiated this project, you may go first. Karen rose gracefully, her smile widening as she turned to address the room. Thank you, Richard, she began, her tone dripping with feigned sincerity. First, I want to say how much I care about this community. Everything I've done has been for the benefit of our neighborhood. The hot tub was meant to enhance property values, to give everyone a space to relax and connect. I'm honestly heartbroken that something so positive has caused such division. She turned to Jamie, her expression suddenly grave. Jamie, I've tried so hard to work with you. I've offered to share the costs, to make this easier for you, but you've resisted at every turn. I don't know why you're so determined to fight something that's good for all of us. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Jamie bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to stay calm. Karen's performance was masterful, but Jamie knew the truth, and soon, so would everyone else. When Karen finished, Hale gestured for Jamie to speak. She stood, her heart pounding, but her voice was steady as she began. Thank you. I want to start by saying that I also care deeply about this neighborhood. That's why I'm here today, not to argue, but to reveal the facts. She picked up the fake resolution and held it up for everyone to see. This document is the cornerstone of Karen's argument. It claims that the Hoa approved the hot tub installation, and it includes signatures from multiple neighbors. But several of those neighbors have confirmed that they never signed this resolution. Their signatures were forged. She paused, letting her words sink in, before continuing. And one of those forged signatures is mine. A hush fell over the room. Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, shaking her head in disbelief. That's a serious accusation, Jamie, she said, her voice tinged with mock offense. Do you have any proof? Jamie didn't respond directly. Instead, she pulled out a printed email and handed it to Hale. This is an email from a year ago, detailing changes to the Hoa bylaws. Those changes, proposed and pushed through by Karen, conveniently gave the Hoa the authority to install shared amenities on private property without the property owner's consent. Karen orchestrated this from the start. She moved to the next piece of evidence, the photographs of her damaged deck, the leaking pipes, and the erosion beneath the structure. This hot tub wasn't just installed without my permission, it was installed recklessly, causing thousands of dollars in damage to my property. And when I asked Karen to remove it, she refused. Jamie's voice grew stronger as she presented her final piece of evidence, the security footage. Here's what Karen has been doing while claiming to act in the best interest of the community. She turned her laptop around so the screen faced the room and pressed play. The footage showed Karen sneaking onto Jamie's deck late at night with a contractor, tampering with the hot tub's pipes. Gasps filled the room as the video played, and several neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. When the video ended, Jamie turned to face Karen directly. This isn't about the neighborhood. This is about you, Karen. Your lies, your manipulation, your blatant disregard for other people's rights. You forged documents, trespassed on my property, and caused significant damage to my home, all to push your personal agenda. And I'm done letting you get away with it. The room was silent for a long moment. Karen's face was a mask of barely concealed fury, her carefully crafted facade finally cracking. This is ridiculous, she snapped, rising from her seat. That video proves nothing. You're just trying to make me look bad because you're too stubborn to see the bigger picture. Hale cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. Ms. Johnson, do you have anything to say in response to these accusations? Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The room was no longer on her side. The murmurs that now spread through the crowd were filled with doubt and suspicion. Even her usual allies on the Hoa board avoided her gaze. Finally, Hale turned back to Jamie. "Ms. Baxter, thank you for presenting your case. The board will need time to review this evidence, but rest assured we take these allegations very seriously." As the meeting adjourned, Jamie felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she had the upper hand. Karen stormed out of the room without another word, but Jamie didn't care. She had done what she came to do, expose the truth. And now, it was only a matter of time before Karen's reign of manipulation came to an end. In the weeks following the Hoa meeting, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted. The smug confidence that Karen had wielded like a weapon was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. While the Hoa board deliberated over Jamie's evidence, rumors swirled about Karen's misconduct. Neighbors who had once defended her began to question her actions, whispering about the forged signatures, the tampered pipes, and the security footage that had played before their very eyes. For Jamie, the waiting game was both a relief and a test of her patience. She knew she had done everything she could to expose Karen's schemes, but part of her worried about how far Karen might go to retaliate. Her security cameras stayed on at all hours, and she made a point to avoid any direct confrontation. But Karen was oddly quiet, retreating into her home and refusing to acknowledge Jamie whenever they crossed paths. It felt like the calm before the storm. Finally, the Hoa delivered its decision. A formal letter arrived in Jamie's mailbox, signed by Richard Hale himself. It stated that the board had found substantial evidence of misconduct on Karen's part, including the forged signatures and unauthorized tampering with Jamie's property. Karen was formally removed from her position on the Hoa board, and the hot tub was ordered to be removed at Karen's expense. Additionally, the Hoa would cover the costs of repairing Jamie's damaged deck, a decision likely motivated by their own embarrassment over allowing Karen's behavior to escalate unchecked. The letter also mentioned that the Hoa had referred Jamie's allegations of forgery and trespassing to local law enforcement for further investigation. For Jamie, this was a small but significant victory. Karen would finally face consequences for her actions, and Jamie could begin to rebuild what had been damaged, not just her deck, but her sense of peace. The removal of the hot tub happened quietly, early one morning. Jamie watched from her kitchen window as a crew arrived to disassemble the bulky structure and haul it away piece by piece. Karen was nowhere to be seen, though her blinds twitched occasionally, revealing that she was likely watching from the shadows. The sight of the hot tub leaving her property felt cathartic, as though a weight had been lifted from Jamie's chest. In the days that followed, Jamie began to reclaim her home. With the help of a local contractor, she reinforced her deck, replacing the water-damaged boards and ensuring the foundation was secure. She took pride in the repairs, feeling a renewed connection to the home she had built with her own hands. Her neighbors, many of whom had initially avoided getting involved, began to reach out. Some offered apologies for their silence, while others commended her for standing up to Karen. "Honestly, we've all been scared of her for years," one neighbor admitted during a casual conversation by the mailbox. "She always knew how to twist things to her advantage. But after what you did, I think people are finally ready to stand up to her." Jamie nodded, accepting the sentiment without bitterness. She didn't need their validation, but it was reassuring to know she wasn't alone anymore. As for Karen, her fall from grace was swift and brutal. The removal from the Hoa board stripped her of much of her influence, and the ongoing police investigation into the forged signatures left her isolated. Neighbors who had once sided with her now avoided her entirely, wary of being associated with her schemes. Though Jamie rarely saw her, she heard whispers that Karen was considering selling her house and leaving the neighborhood altogether. One crisp Saturday morning, as Jamie stood on her newly repaired deck sipping her coffee, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The weeks of conflict, the sleepless nights, the mounting stress, it had all been worth it to protect her home. She felt stronger now, not just because she had won, but because she had faced something so insidious and refused to back down. Deciding to celebrate, Jamie invited a few neighbors over for an informal gathering on her deck. It wasn't a large party, just a handful of people who had shown her kindness or support during the ordeal. As they sat together, laughing and enjoying the crisp autumn air, Jamie felt a sense of closure. The deck, once a battleground for Karen's control, was now a symbol of resilience. Jamie had fought for it, repaired it, and reclaimed it as her own. It wasn't just a place to relax, it was a reminder of her strength, her determination, and her refusal to let anyone dictate her life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm golden light over the neighborhood, Jamie smiled to herself. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The fight was over, and she had won not just her deck but her freedom. And as the laughter of her guests filled the air, she knew that no one, not even Karen, could take that away from her again.